Hello everyone, welcome to 5 in 25. My name is Lauren Flores and I'm joined this evening by my colleague Cindy De Leon, and we're going to talk about 5 words that have been current in the news. And in a moment I will read out the words and we'll start our discussion about them. But I wanted to really quickly mention that if you have any questions, you can always ask them. Cindy is there in chat, so if you want to ask Cindy a question directly in chat, you can do that. If you want to have a discussion, you can just let her know and we can talk about it on stream. Or if you'd like, she can answer your question just there in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our 5 terms this evening. So our first one is going to be perseverance. Our next one is going to be mandate. And then the next one will be filibuster, and then that will be followed by ERCOT and Junta. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our very first word, which is perseverance. And you'll see that I do have the Merriam-Webster webpage up. It's one of my favorite web pages. It's one of my favorite dictionaries. And this is the exact meaning of perseverance, which it is a noun. And if you look at their definition that they have on the page, it describes this word as being a continued effort to do or achieve something despite difficulties, failure, or opposition. And it also means the action or condition or an instance of persevering. So it's also giving us a similar term, which is steadfastness. And you'll see that they do show you how this word is used in several different sentences. And if you look further down the page, it'll tell you about how old the word is. So it looks like this particular word is pretty old. It was first used in the 14th century, so it has been around in English for quite a while. And I did want to mention, of course, that one of the reasons why we've been hearing this word in the news is, of course, there is a a Mars landing. And so the name of the rover is Perseverance. And I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures because I think it's kind of cool. So this is a picture of the rover, or I think it's like an artistic rendition of it. Apparently they launched this rover last year. So it was sometime, I believe it was like July 30th. When it left for Mars, and it didn't get to Mars and land until the 18th of February of this year. So you can see that, of course, everybody has been really, really excited about it. The word is kind of interesting as well because it was chosen from a contest. So there was an essay contest that NASA had, and so the winning entry was from a 13-year-old boy named Alexander Mather, and he basically said that he felt that perseverance was a really good description of human beings and the way that we would have to persevere to explore space and Mars. And I wanted to show you really quickly, and I'm going to switch back to our webpage really quickly. There is a website that I found, and it is from NASA, so it talks all about this particular mission and the rover. So if you have a chance, I would recommend checking it out. I love that it tells you how many images that they have. It'll give you a mission overview, and it tells you how long the rover has been on Mars. And one other thing that I wanted to mention before we move on to our next term is the actual place where the rover landed was named after an author named Octavia Butler. So if you're interested, we do have books by Octavia Butler in our library. If you go to the library's website, which is mysapl.org, she was a really amazing visionary writer. And so if you have a chance, I would definitely recommend all of the novels that she's written. But I'm going to go ahead and pause really quickly and check and see. So Cindy, are there any questions in chat before we get to our next word?
No.
Okay, well, great. So we're going to go to the next one, and let me go ahead and switch to a mandate. And let me get to the Merriam-Webster dictionary again, and we're going to type in
There's
mandate.
a delay, but no question.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I was going to go ahead and get started with our description of mandate. And this term is really interesting because it has several different meanings, and some of them are historical and maybe not as used as much. nowadays. So you'll see that the very first definition talks about a mandate being an authoritative command. So it's like a formal order. So that is a way that we do use this word mandate, at least fairly recently. There's also the second definition, which is an authorization or act given to a representative. And so that's more of a political type of definition that has to do with voters approving of certain political figures when they vote for them. And then the third definition is this one that I was mentioning that's a little bit older. And so just to kind of give you a quick history lesson, before we had the United Nations, there was a similar body where different countries would go and, have discussions and debate, and it was basically to improve communication. It was called the League of Nations, and it was in between World War I and World War II. And so at the time after World War I, there was some issues with different disorganized states. And so the League of Nations had different territories that they called mandates. And so you'll see that that's where this third description comes from. And just to kind of talk a little bit about the League of Nations and this particular meaning, in case you're interested. But this is just a newspaper from the New York Times talking about the League of Nations. And the president that was one of the founders was Woodrow Wilson. And of course, nowadays, when we use the word mandate, we're really talking about more of an order. And so this is an example that I found where I've seen that Joe Biden, which is our current president, his push for people to wear masks has been described as a mandate in news. And so you'll see this word as well in different contexts, but basically it refers to either like an order or basically like a really strong suggestion. And I wanted to pause for a second in case there are any questions and see if Cindy had anything that she'd like to add.
It sounds like you covered it all. No question.
Okay, so we're going to move to the next term, which is filibuster. And I'm going to go back to our dictionary and look that up. And actually, I thought filibuster was very interesting because it has an unexpected meaning that I'd never heard of before. And I'm typing in filibuster. And so this very, very first definition was the one that I found that was so unexpected. It looks like at one time the word filibuster meant an irregular military adventure. Just in further reading that I did, it sounds like this comes from possibly the Dutch language, and it originally referred to a pirate. But you'll see, at least in the 19th century, it had a really specific meaning. So it meant an American who was engaged in insurrections in Latin America. So I thought that was kind of surprising. Of course, generally, when we talk about filibusters now, we're actually talking about a type of parliamentary procedure that happens in our Senate. And you'll see that the second entry talks about this particular practice. And so it describes this as being an extreme dilatory, I think is how you say that, tactic. So in other words, it's a type of delaying action that you do, and normally it involves long speeches. And so it can refer to, of course, the act of having a filibuster, having a really long speech that lasts hours, or it can also refer to the times that this practice has happened. So there have been several different times where they've had filibusters, and I wanted to show you just a couple of sources in case you're interested. And I think first what I'll do is go to the senate.gov site. They do have some information in a glossary. And they do talk about the word filibuster, and the way that they describe it, I think, is a lot more brief and succinct and to the point. So they basically talk about the filibuster is a way to delay debate or block legislation, and apparently it's had a very long history in the Senate. It does talk about the fact that it is from a Dutch word meaning pirate. And it does say that this particular action became popular in the United States during the 1850s, and so they apparently started using it quite a bit at this particular time in history. And of course, they do have a lot of other resources. If you're interested, it has several different events. It talks about a movie, and we're going to look at a still from a movie called Mr. Smith Comes to Washington. It has a famous actor in it. It was from the 30s. And so one of the big scenes in this movie is the character gets up and performs a filibuster. And then, of course, if you really want to know all about the rules and regulations, you can click on this particular document that talks about filibusters and cloture in the Senate, and you can learn all about it. And so I did want to quickly show you a couple of other things that are related. And you'll see this is from Wikipedia. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it talks about the longest filibusters that have happened in the Senate since 1900. And you'll see that there have been some that have been pretty long. It will tell you the name of the politician or legislator that performed the filibuster and the measure that they were opposing or attempting to delay. So you'll see that it looks like the very longest filibuster in the US Senate was 24 hours and 18 minutes. I thought it was kind of interesting because it looks like even the shortest one here at the bottom, at least, rated as number 10, was 14 hours and 50 minutes. So that is quite a long time. And I did mention that there was a movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And so this is just a still of the movie when he gets up and begins to do his filibuster. And I wanted to pause for a moment and check in with Cindy and see if we had any questions. And it sounds like we might not. So I did want to mention. Oh, yes, as you were saying, Cindy?
No questions. For some reason, the sound, I just lost the sound for a second, but no question.
Cool. Okay. So I just wanted to mention, again, just in case you're interested, there's a lot of discussion going on right now. So if you do go to the news, you'll see that there's a lot of talk and basically a lot of debate on maybe trying to eliminate this particular tactic. And so I would say that this is probably going to be a word that we're going to see in the news for a while at least. And again, if you have any questions, you can type it in chat and we'll be happy to answer. But I'm going to go ahead and actually turn it over to Cindy now, and she's going to talk about the next two terms. And so those would be ERCOT and Junta. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her now.
Welcome to 5 and 25. I'm doing a few vocabulary words for you. My vocabulary word today is ERCOT. And ERCOT has been in the news lately because of our recent winter storms. ERCOT stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and it operates the electric grid and manages the deregulated market for about 75 to 90% of the state of Texas.
There's a little bit of a delay.
State-run organization. It's an independent entity. It's and a nonprofit. It is a free market electric grid. And the fact that it was deregulated was supposed to save money for consumers. The history of ERCOT began in the 1930s with President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Federal Power Act, which put the Federal Power Commission in charge of regulating interstate electricity sales, according to the Austin American-Statesman. There were problems later on, and in response to that, the ERCOT was formed in 1970. Of course, before last month's winter storm, almost no one had heard of ERCOT. I certainly had not, but they are in the news now. According to the AP, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas's apparent failure to prepare for their cold weather, Winter Storm Uri, which brought ice and snow and some of the coldest temperatures in decades, particularly in Texas and across the South, has really come under fire. Millions of ERCOT customers were left without power and water, while some customers have faced enormous bills due to the spike uh, in demand. According to NBC News, quote, and I quote, low water pressure, mainly due to burst pipes, a lack of generators, and frozen fire hydrants, uh, affected everyone. It even affected hospitals around the states. And dozens of people died in their homes from the cold, but we may not know how many for a while until all the death certificates are filed. People magazine said that at least 37 people died from the storm. ERCOT was supposed to provide reliable energy, but the problems were so extensive in Texas that plans for providing energy in cold weather weren't sufficient for that level of cold. ERCOT's a private body that tells member utilities how much power to produce, depending on factors like the weather and fuel and supplies. And it's supposed to be regulated by the state, according to the author Richard Parker. But the Texas energy grid is independent from the rest of the country, so it couldn't get electricity from other sources. The Texas power grid is unique because it isn't part of a network. Government officials decided to go it alone in 1970 to avoid regulation, so as a result, they couldn't draw power from anywhere else. Because it does not cross state lines, ERCOT is not subject to federal regulations. So when a major 2011 storm prompted federal regulators to set standards for winterizing systems, ERCOT did not have to comply. Again, NBC News did refer to ERCOT as America's only independent electrical service, so it is unique. But that did not work in its favor this time because it was simply not winterized. ERCOT resorted to rolling blackouts that affected 26 million people. Millions of people were without power and water. ERCOT told people that the rolling blackouts were only supposed to last a short time, but they lasted days. But there has definitely been some fallout for ERCOT. The ERCOT president and CEO, Bill Magnus, was fired. 5 out-of-state members of the organization resigned, and ERCOT is being investigated by lawmakers because people want answers. So we will wait and see what happens to ERCOT. So again, that's ERCOT, which stands for Electrical Reliability Council of Texas.
Hello. My next word for 5 and 25 is junta. It's spelled Junta. And in Spanish, junta means board, committee, meeting or session, or joint or gasket. And it's been in the news a lot lately because it's used to describe a military committee that takes power, which happened in Myanmar in the last couple of months. So junta can be pronounced the Spanish way, junta, spelled Junta, or in English it can be pronounced junta. And for a long time, the 18th century borrowing from Spanish was pronounced junta by English speakers, but now junta is more popular. And the word means especially a group of persons controlling a government, specifically after a revolutionary seizure of power. And the American Heritage Dictionary specifies that a junta is a group of military officers ruling a country after seizing power. In other words, a junta is a ruling council military dictatorship. And that would explain why it's usually said in a sentence with the word military in front of it. For example, the military junta in Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, has seized power. And here's an excerpt from the newspaper that shows you how the word junta is used. It's from David Pearson of the Los Angeles Times. And it says, the article is, "We Will Not Run. Teenager's Death Inspires Myanmar Protesters and Inflames Crisis." It's from March 4th. And it says, "Tens of thousands of residents have taken to the street demanding an end to the junta and the release of leaders of the National League for Democracy, including the party's standard bearer, Aung San Suu Kyi." And according to Wikipedia, people started using the word junta this way in 1808. The term junta means meeting or committee, of course, and it originated in the national and local junta organized by the Spanish resistance to Napoleon's invasion of Spain in 1808. And in an article entitled Military Role that appeared in the Annual Review of Political Science, we've learned about the history of juntas. There have been many juntas over the years, and these juntas consist of military officers who took over the government. Since World War II, military officers have been overthrowing many civilian governments. Occasionally, they return power to civilians after a few days, but sometimes they don't. Instead, they establish a military rule led by either one military strongman or general or a junta representing all the officers in the officer corps. There have been many famous juntas in the 20th and 21st century. Among the most famous juntas who took over countries after coups or golpes de Estado have been the junta in Argentina in the 1970s that waged a dirty war or guerra sucia against its own people and torturing and killing more than 30,000. Um, Juntas usually wage a violent war against their own people, torturing and killing people. Other juntas took over countries such as Chile from 1974 to 1990, Greece from 1967 to 1974. There have been juntas in Nigeria. There were four of them. The first one was 1966 to 1973, and there have been others. Juntas are either overthrown by a return to democracy or sometimes another junta, and that's also according to Wikipedia. Juntas tend to be right wing, but there are left wing juntas also, such as the one in Ethiopia from 1974 to 1987. And that's from Merriam Webster's and also biography from the Los Angeles Times. Currently, the Canadian University McGill lists the following countries under the control of juntas: Libya, and let's see how many you've heard of. So, Libya, Mauritania, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sudan, and Thailand. A junta state exists when the nation's armed forces control everything. They control the organs of government, and all high-ranking political executives are also members of the military. But now, with the advent of social media, anti-junta protesters in Myanmar or Burma are getting their word out with signs in English and information in English on social media sites like TikTok and Facebook, where they hope to garner more attention for their cause. Perhaps more citizens will use social media to focus on different juntas and their abuse of power. Maybe more juntas will topple. We will just have to see. Thank you.
So I just wanted to quickly thank Cindy. Thank you so much for your wonderful discussions about ERCOT and Junta. Just out of curiosity, was there anything interesting that you'd like to add, or maybe tell us about something that you found that was interesting that you hadn't heard about?
Can you hear me? Yes.
I can.
I was very interested to learn that there were left wing and right wing juntas, and I did not know that the term dated back to 1808. That was news to me. That was a surprise.
Same here. And I also thought it was interesting that they used to, as you mentioned, use the English version. So I guess it would be Junta instead of Junta, because I've only ever heard people say Junta in my life, basically.
Me too.
Well, I wanted to check in and see, do we have any questions in chat? We do have a little bit of time remaining. So if we don't have any questions, what I can do is just quickly show you just a couple of things before we sign off. I did want to mention that we do have this really excellent resource. You might have seen it if you watched several of our streams. It's called Credo Reference, and you can get to it from the library's homepage. And let me see if I can pull it up on the screen. There we are. So this is actually the database. I can show you in a moment how to get to it from the library homepage. But I did want to point out that it does have a lot of really good information. It's kind of like I would say a scholarly version of maybe Wikipedia. So you get a lot of encyclopedias in here, and some of them are subject specific. It also has other resources. So sometimes you'll see links to different news articles as well. So it's definitely a very useful tool. And if we go to the library's website, if you go to services and then databases, and if you go to the letter C, you will find Credo. And when you click on the link, it's going to prompt you to log in with your library card number and your password. So again, just wanted to make you aware of this really excellent resource. And of course, we have a lot of other databases as well and a lot of other cool stuff in the library. So I would highly encourage you to explore the library's webpage. And I'm going to stop really quickly and just check in with Cindy one last time because we are pretty much at time.
No questions, Lauren. That's very interesting about the Credo reference database. I have to admit that I haven't explored it as much as I should. It looks like it would really help a lot of students.
I think so, and I think just in general, as a general knowledge source, it's really helpful because it does have those really specific reference books. So like if you're looking for a word that is more political, you can get the political dimension. Whereas if you're looking just in a regular dictionary, it doesn't really give you that extra information. So I did want to thank everyone for watching, and we are looking forward to seeing you next month for our next stream. It's going to be on April the 6th at this time, so from 7 to 7:25 or 7:30 p.m. And I wanted to also thank Cindy for her wonderful presentation and for joining us and being a moderator and a part of this stream. And I wanted to wish everybody a wonderful evening, and we will see you later next month.
See you next month. Thank